My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I never imagined that the hardest thing I'd ever do would be slipping a letter into my father's suit pocket as he lay in his casket. The funeral home in downtown Portland smelled of lilies and disinfectant, a combination that would forever remind me of this moment. Outside, the Oregon rain tapped against the windows like fingers drumming impatiently, as if the world itself was waiting for me to find the courage to do what I knew I had to do. I stood there in my black dress, the one I'd bought specifically for this day, staring at Dad's peaceful face. He looked younger somehow, as if death had erased the worry lines that had deepened over the past few years. My hands trembled as I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. The paper was slightly crumpled from being carried around for 3 days, ever since I'd finally worked up the nerve to write it. "Sarah," my mother's voice came from behind me, soft and concerned. "Honey, are you okay?" I quickly slipped the letter into Dad's jacket pocket, my heart racing. "I'm fine, Mom. Just saying goodbye." Margaret Mitchell, my mother, approached with that careful walk she'd developed since Dad's diagnosis. At 62, she seemed to have aged a decade in the past year. Her silver hair was perfectly styled for the funeral, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone who'd spent months watching the person she loved most fade away. "The service starts in an hour," she said, adjusting a flower in the spray across the casket. "Father Williams will be here soon to do the final blessing." Father Williams, the priest who'd known our family for over 20 years, the man who'd baptized me, confirmed me, and who Dad had specifically requested to perform his funeral service. My stomach clenched at the thought of him discovering the letter, but I pushed the feeling aside. What was done was done. The funeral home director, Mr. Peterson, appeared at my shoulder. He was a thin man with kind eyes who'd guided us through every detail of the arrangements with professional compassion. "Mrs. Mitchell, the family viewing time is almost over. Would you like a few more minutes?" Mom nodded, and I watched as she leaned down to kiss Dad's forehead. "I love you, Robert," she whispered. "I'll take care of everything, just like we talked about." But she didn't know about the letter. She didn't know about the secret I'd been carrying for 15 years, the one that had eaten away at me every Sunday as we sat in church, every holiday dinner, every birthday celebration. The secret that had made me feel like a fraud every time someone complimented our perfect family. As Mom stepped back, I took my turn. I placed my hand on Dad's folded hands, feeling the coolness of his skin through the fabric of his gloves. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered so quietly that only he could hear. "I'm so sorry I waited so long." The letter in his pocket contained everything I'd never been able to say while he was alive. The truth about why I'd dropped out of law school. The real reason I'd moved across the country for 2 years. The explanation for all those phone calls that ended abruptly when he walked into the room. The words I'd rehearsed 1,000 times, but never had the courage to speak. "Sarah, dear, you should eat something before the service." Mom's hand touched my shoulder gently. "Mrs. Henderson brought a casserole, and there's coffee in the family room." I nodded, though the thought of food made my stomach turn. The family room was filled with relatives who'd traveled from across the country. My Aunt Linda from Texas, Uncle Jim from Colorado, cousins I hadn't seen in years. They all wore the same expression of sympathetic concern, speaking in hushed tones about Dad's battle with cancer, about how, at least he's at peace now. My younger brother Jake sat in the corner, his wife Emma beside him, their 3-year-old daughter Lily coloring quietly in a children's book. Jake looked like Dad had at his age, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same steady brown eyes. He'd been Dad's pride and joy, the son who'd followed in his footsteps to become an engineer, who'd given him grandchildren, who'd never caused a moment's worry. "You okay, sis?" Jake asked as I approached. "Just tired," I replied, which wasn't entirely untrue. I'd barely slept in days, my mind racing with the decision to write the letter, to hide it, to let someone else discover what I couldn't say myself. Emma, ever perceptive, studied my face. "You seem, I don't know, different today. Are you sure you're all right?" I forced a smile. "It's just hard, you know, saying goodbye." What I didn't say was that it wasn't just goodbye I was dealing with. It was the weight of 15 years of lies, 15 years of pretending to be someone I wasn't, 15 years of disappointing a man who'd loved me unconditionally, even though I'd never given him the chance to prove it. The funeral home began to fill with people. Dad's colleagues from the engineering firm where he'd worked for 30 years, neighbors from our tree-lined street in the suburbs, members of St. Mary's Catholic Church, where Dad had served as a deacon for over a decade. Friends from his golf club, his book club, his volunteer work at the homeless shelter. Everyone had a story about Robert Mitchell, how he'd helped them move, how he'd fixed their car, how he'd listened when they needed someone to talk to, how he'd been there during their own difficult times. He was the kind of man who made the world better simply by being in it. And now, he was gone. As I mingled with the mourners, accepting condolences and sharing memories, I kept thinking about the letter. What would happen when Father Williams found it? Would he read it privately first? Would he feel obligated to share it with the family? Would he understand why I'd chosen this way to reveal the truth? The letter was simple, written in my own handwriting on plain white paper. No dramatics, no lengthy explanations, just the truth, finally spoken after all these years of silence. "Dad," it began, "I know you're not here to read this, but I need you to know something I should have told you years ago. I'm gay. I have been my entire life, and I've been hiding it from you and Mom because I was afraid. Afraid you'd be disappointed. Afraid you'd love me less. Afraid you'd think I was going to hell." The letter went on to explain about Jessica, my partner of 8 years who lived in Seattle, how we'd bought a house together, how she'd supported me through graduate school, how she'd wanted to come to the funeral, but I told her it was too complicated, how I'd spent holidays choosing between the woman I loved and the family I couldn't bear to lose. "I know this isn't how you would have wanted to find out," the letter continued, "but I couldn't let you be buried with this lie between us. I love you, Dad. I've always loved you, and I hope that somewhere, somehow, you can forgive me for not trusting you with the truth." As the afternoon wore on, I watched Father Williams arrive. He was in his 70s now, his hair white and his steps slower than I remembered from my childhood. But his eyes were still sharp, still kind, still holding the wisdom that had guided our parish for decades. He went directly to the casket for his private blessing, as was his custom. This was when he would pray over the deceased, when he would prepare the body for the final journey. This was when he would check that everything was in order before the service began. My heart pounded as I watched him approach Dad's casket. I wanted to run over, to snatch the letter back, to protect my secret for just a little longer, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. Part of me was terrified, but another part was relieved. After 15 years of carrying this weight, maybe it was time to let it go. Father Williams bent over the casket, his lips moving in silent prayer. His hands moved gently, adjusting Dad's tie, smoothing his hair, checking that everything was perfect for the final goodbye. And then I saw it. His hand brushed against Dad's jacket pocket, and I watched his expression change. He paused, glanced around the room, then carefully reached into the pocket. His fingers emerged with the envelope, and I saw him read my name, written on the front in Dad's handwriting, because I'd written it as if it were from him, one last message from father to daughter. But Father Williams knew Dad's handwriting. He'd seen it on countless church documents, on donations, on volunteer forms. He would know immediately that this wasn't Dad's writing. He would know that someone else had placed this letter in the casket. I watched as he opened the envelope, his face growing more serious with each word he read. When he finished, he looked up and scanned the room until his eyes found mine. There was no judgment in his gaze, no shock or disappointment, just understanding, and something that might have been compassion. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and walked over to where I stood, frozen by the wall. "Sarah," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Father Williams led me to a small office behind the funeral home's main chapel. The room was simple, with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot, where people were beginning to gather for the evening service. I sat down heavily, my hands shaking as I tried to process what had just happened. "I didn't mean for you to find it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't let him be buried without knowing the truth. Father Williams sat across from me, the letter still in his hands. His expression was thoughtful, not angry or disappointed as I'd feared. "How long have you been carrying this, Sarah?" 15 years, I admitted, since I was 22. I've wanted to tell them so many times, but every time I got close, I'd lose my nerve." He nodded slowly. "And Jessica? Tell me about her." I was surprised by the question. I'd expected judgment, perhaps a lecture about sin and redemption. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in understanding. "We met in graduate school. She's a therapist now, specializes in working with teenagers. She's kind, funny, patient with me, even when I don't deserve it. She's everything I could have hoped for in a partner. And she's never met your family? The question hit like a physical blow. No, I've told her about them, shown her pictures. She's heard all my stories about growing up here, about Dad's terrible dad jokes and Mom's amazing cooking. But I've never been brave enough to bring her home. Father Williams was quiet for a long moment. Your father loved you very much, Sarah. That was evident to anyone who knew him. He talked about you constantly. Your job at the nonprofit, your graduate degree, how proud he was of the woman you'd become. Tears started falling then. Tears I'd been holding back for days. But he didn't know the real me. He loved a version of me that wasn't complete. How can love be real if it's based on a lie? Love isn't based on knowing every detail about someone, Father Williams said gently. Love is based on caring about someone's happiness, their well-being, their growth as a person. Your father loved your heart, your compassion, your determination. Those things are real, regardless of who you choose to spend your life with. I looked up at him through my tears. But what about the church? What about what the Bible says? Dad was a deacon, for God's sake. He believed in the teachings. Father Williams sighed, and for the first time, he looked his age. I've been a priest for 47 years, Sarah. I've seen a lot of pain caused by people who claim to speak for God, but I've also seen a lot of love, in all its forms. Your father was a man of faith, but he was also a man of love. And love, true love, is never wrong. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gathering crowd. I've known many families like yours, good, faithful people who struggle with understanding something they've never experienced themselves. But I've also seen what happens when love is given the chance to grow and evolve. What do you mean? I mean that your father might have surprised you. People who truly love us often do. I wiped my eyes with the tissue he handed me. But it's too late now. I'll never know how he would have reacted. I'll never have the chance to bring Jessica home for Christmas or to have them walk me down the aisle if we ever get married. I'll never see Dad hold my children if we decide to adopt. I missed all of that because I was too scared. Maybe, Father Williams said, or maybe this is the beginning of a different kind of healing. Before I could ask what he meant, there was a soft knock on the door. Mom's voice came through. Father Williams? We're ready to begin the service. He looked at me with concern. Are you all right to continue? We can delay if you need more time. I shook my head. No, I need to do this. I need to say goodbye properly. He handed me the letter. This is yours. What you do with it is your choice. I stared at the envelope, feeling its weight. What would you do? I would trust in love, he said simply. Both God's love and the love of your family. But the decision has to be yours. We returned to the main chapel, where over 200 people had gathered to honor Dad's memory. The front rows were reserved for family, and I took my place between Mom and Jake, the letter hidden in my purse. The service was beautiful, filled with music Dad had loved, and readings from scripture that had meant something to him. Father Williams spoke about Dad's life, his dedication to his family, his service to the community, his faith. He talked about how Dad had touched so many lives, how he'd been a man who tried to make the world better for everyone around him. Robert Mitchell was a man who believed in the power of love, Father Williams said, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. He believed that love could overcome any obstacle, bridge any gap, heal any wound. He lived his life as an example of that love, and he would want us to continue that example in his memory. As the service continued, I found myself thinking about Dad's life, how he'd worked 2 jobs to put Jake and me through college, how he'd driven 8 hours to help me move into my first apartment, how he'd called every Sunday just to check in, even when I was busy and distracted, how he'd never missed a birthday, a graduation, an important moment in my life. The man Father Williams described was someone who loved unconditionally, who believed in the goodness of people, who tried to see the best in everyone. Was it possible that he would have accepted me? That he would have loved Jessica because she made me happy? During the eulogy, Jake stood to speak about Dad. His voice was steady, but I could see the emotion in his face. My father taught me that being a good man means standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. He taught me that family is the most important thing in the world, and that love is what holds us together. Jake's words hit me like a revelation. Dad had raised us both to believe in love, in acceptance, in doing what was right. If he'd lived his life according to those principles, maybe I'd been wrong about how he would have reacted to my truth. As the service concluded and we prepared to move to the cemetery for the burial, I made a decision. I pulled the letter from my purse and approached Mom, who was accepting condolences from the long line of mourners. "Mom," I said quietly, "I need to talk to you about something. After we get home tonight." She looked at me with concern. "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything all right?" "I hope so," I said. "I really hope so." The drive to the cemetery was quiet, our family limousine following the hearse through the streets of Portland. Mom held my hand, and Jake sat across from us with Emma and Lily. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. At the graveside, Father Williams performed the final blessing. As they lowered Dad's casket into the ground, I thought about the letter I'd placed in his pocket. Even though I'd taken it back, in a way it had accomplished what I'd intended. It had forced me to confront the truth, to consider the possibility that love might be stronger than fear. As we threw handfuls of dirt onto the casket, I whispered my own goodbye. "I love you, Dad, and I'm going to try to be brave enough to live the truth you taught me, that love is what matters most." The reception was held at our house, the same house where I'd grown up. The living room was filled with flowers and food, with people sharing stories about Dad and offering comfort to our family. I moved through the crowd, thanking people for coming, but my mind was focused on the conversation I needed to have with Mom. Finally, as the last guests were leaving, I found myself alone with her in the kitchen. She was washing dishes, a task that always seemed to comfort her during difficult times. "You wanted to talk?" she said, without turning around. I took a deep breath. "Mom, I need to tell you something about my life, something I should have told you and Dad a long time ago." She turned off the water and faced me, her expression serious. "You're gay." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "You're gay," she repeated calmly. "And you've been hiding it from us for years." I stared at her in shock. "How did you—" "I'm your mother, Sarah. I've known you your entire life. Did you really think I wouldn't notice that you never dated anyone seriously? That you never brought anyone home? That you got nervous every time we asked about your personal life?" I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. "You knew?" "I suspected. Your father and I both did. We talked about it sometimes, wondering if you'd ever trust us enough to tell us the truth." "You and Dad talked about it?" Mom sat down across from me, her eyes soft with understanding. "We knew you were struggling with something. We could see it in your face whenever you came home, the way you seemed to be holding something back. We wanted to help, but we didn't know how to approach it without making you feel pressured." I felt tears starting again. "I thought you'd be disappointed. I thought Dad would think I was going to hell." "Oh, sweetheart," Mom said, reaching across the table to take my hands. "Your father was many things, but he was never judgmental. He loved you exactly as you are. We both do. But the church teaches love, Sarah. At least the parts that matter do. Your father believed that God's love was bigger than any human interpretation of Scripture. He believed that love in all its forms was a gift." I couldn't stop crying now. "There's someone, Mom. Her name is Jessica. We've been together for 8 years. She's wonderful, and I love her, and I've been too scared to let you meet her." Mom squeezed my hands. "Then it's time you brought her home." 3 months after Dad's funeral, I stood in the Seattle airport, my palms sweating as I waited for Jessica to return from her business trip. I'd called her that night after talking with Mom, and through tears, I'd told her everything. About the letter, about Father Williams, about the conversation that had changed everything. "I want you to meet my family," I'd said. "I want to bring you home for Thanksgiving." Jessica had been quiet for a long time. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured because of everything that's happened." "I'm sure. I should have done this years ago. I want them to know the person I love." Now, watching her walk toward me through the terminal, I felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Jessica was beautiful in a way that wasn't immediately obvious. She had kind eyes, a warm smile, and a presence that made people feel comfortable. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked tired from her week in Chicago. "How was the conference?" I asked after kissing her hello. "Good, but I'm glad to be home. How are you feeling about everything?" I'd been asking myself that question for weeks, terrified and relieved at the same time. "Is that possible?" Jessica laughed. "Absolutely. That's how I felt when I came out to my parents. Like I was jumping off a cliff, but also like I was finally going to be able to fly." We spent the next few weeks preparing for the trip to Portland. Jessica wanted to bring gifts, something special for Mom, something for Jake and Emma, something for little Lily. We went shopping together, and I found myself seeing my hometown through her eyes for the first time. Tell me about the house, Jessica said, as we picked out a bottle of wine for Mom. I want to be able to picture where you grew up. I described the 2-story colonial with the big front porch, the maple tree in the yard that Dad had planted when I was born, the kitchen where Mom had taught me to cook, the living room where we'd open presents every Christmas morning. And your brother? What's he like? Jake's the responsible one. He's steady, practical, good with his hands like Dad was. He married his college sweetheart, and they have the most adorable 3-year-old. He's going to love you once he gets over the shock. And your mom? I thought about Mom, about how she'd held me that night in the kitchen, about how she'd called me every week since then just to check in. She's stronger than I gave her credit for. She's been through so much with Dad's illness, but she's handling everything with such grace. She's excited to meet you. The night before we left, Jessica and I had a long conversation about expectations. We'd been together for 8 years, but this felt like a new beginning. For the first time, I was going to be completely myself with my family. What if they don't like me? Jessica asked. They will. How could they not? You're kind, funny, smart, and you make me happy. That's all they'll care about. And what if it's awkward? It probably will be at first, but we'll figure it out together. The flight to Portland was short, but it felt like the longest hour of my life. I kept thinking about Dad, wishing he could be there to meet Jessica. I knew he would have loved her. Her laugh, her intelligence, her dedication to helping teenagers through difficult times. Mom was waiting for us at the airport, wearing a blue dress I'd bought her for Mother's Day and a nervous smile. When she saw Jessica, her face lit up with genuine warmth. You must be Jessica, she said, pulling her into a hug. I'm so glad to finally meet you. Sarah has told me so much about you. Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for having me. I'm sorry it took so long for us to meet. Please, call me Margaret. And don't worry about the timing. What matters is that you're here now. The drive home was filled with conversation. Mom asked Jessica about her work, about Seattle, about her family. Jessica was relaxed and charming, and I could see Mom warming to her immediately. Sarah tells me you're a therapist, Mom said. That must be difficult work. It can be challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. I specialize in working with teenagers who are struggling with identity issues, family conflicts, that sort of thing. A lot of kids who are trying to figure out who they are and how to talk to their parents about it. I saw Mom glance at me in the rearview mirror. That sounds like important work. When we arrived at the house, I felt a wave of emotion. Everything looked exactly the same. The front porch where Dad used to sit and read the newspaper, the garden where Mom grew tomatoes and herbs, the basketball hoop where Jake and I used to play one-on-one. It's beautiful, Jessica said, squeezing my hand. I can see why you love it here. Jake and Emma were waiting in the living room with Lily, who was now almost 4 and full of energy. The introductions were slightly awkward at first, but Jessica had a natural way with children, and soon Lily was showing her a book about dinosaurs. Aunt Sarah, is Jessica your girlfriend? Lily asked with the blunt honesty of a child. The room went quiet. I looked at Jessica, then at my family, and realized this was the moment I'd been preparing for without knowing it. Yes, sweetheart, I said. Jessica is my girlfriend. We live together in Seattle. Cool, Lily said, already losing interest and returning to her book. Can you read to me? The simplicity of her acceptance broke the tension, and everyone laughed. Jake extended his hand to Jessica with a genuine smile. Welcome to the family, he said. I'm sorry it took so long. That evening, we all cooked dinner together. Mom's famous pot roast, Jessica's contribution of roasted vegetables, Emma's homemade bread. The kitchen was full of laughter and conversation, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at home. After dinner, Mom brought out photo albums, and we spent hours going through pictures of my childhood. Jessica saw me at age 5, covered in mud from playing in the backyard. At 10, missing my front teeth but grinning widely at my first piano recital. At 16, awkward and gangly in my prom dress. She was always beautiful, Mom said, but she looks happier now than she has in years. She makes me happy too, Jessica replied, and I saw the truth of it in her eyes. That night, as Jessica and I lay in my childhood bedroom, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. The walls were still covered with my high school awards and college pennants, but now they felt like artifacts from a different person's life. Your family is wonderful, Jessica said softly. I can see where you get your kindness from. I can't believe I waited so long to do this. I wasted so much time being scared. You weren't ready before, but you're ready now. and that's what matters. The next morning, Mom asked if we'd like to go to church with her. I felt my old anxiety return, but Jessica squeezed my hand. "I'd like that," she said, "if you're comfortable with it, Saint." Mary's looked exactly as I remembered. The same stained glass windows, the same wooden pews, the same sense of sacred space. Father Williams was still the pastor, though he moved more slowly now. When he saw us, his face broke into a warm smile. "Sarah, it's good to see you. And this must be Jessica. Father Williams, thank you for everything you said at Dad's funeral. It helped me find the courage to be honest. Your father would be proud of you," he said simply. "Both of you." During the service, I found myself thinking about faith in a new way, not as a set of rules to follow, but as a foundation for love and acceptance. Jessica held my hand during the prayers, and no one stared or whispered. We were just another family, worshiping together. After church, we visited Dad's grave. I'd brought flowers, white roses, his favorite. As we stood there in the quiet cemetery, I felt Jessica's arm around my waist, Mom's hand on my shoulder, and I knew that Dad was somehow present in the love surrounding me. "I wish you could have met her, Dad," I said quietly. "I think you would have loved her." "I know he would have," Mom said. "He always said he just wanted you to be happy." That afternoon, we went for a walk through my old neighborhood. Jessica wanted to see the school where I'd gone to elementary school, the park where I'd played as a child, the library where I'd spent countless hours reading. "This is where I had my first kiss," I said, pointing to a bench by the pond. "Tommy Morrison, 5th grade. I was so nervous I almost threw up." Jessica laughed. "And how did that compare to your first kiss with a girl?" "No comparison. When I kissed Amy Patterson at summer camp when I was 16, I finally understood what all the fuss was about." "You never told me about Amy Patterson." "There wasn't much to tell. We kissed once, I panicked, and I spent the rest of the summer avoiding her. But it was the moment I knew for sure who I was." As we walked, I pointed out landmarks of my childhood. The ice cream shop where Dad used to take Jake and me on Saturday afternoons, the movie theater where I'd seen my first grown-up film, the bookstore where I'd bought my first romance novel. "I can picture you as a little girl," Jessica said. "Serious, thoughtful, probably reading instead of playing with other kids." "Pretty much. I was always the weird one who preferred books to people. And now you're the weird one who prefers me to people. Now I'm the weird one who found someone who makes me want to be around people." That evening, we had a family game night. Mom brought out Scrabble. Jake set up the card table, and Emma made popcorn. Lily insisted on being on Jessica's team, and they ended up winning 3 games in a row. "I think you're cheating," I accused Jessica playfully. "I'm not cheating. I'm just playing with a very skilled partner." She ruffled Lily's hair, and the little girl beamed. As the evening wound down, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. "She's perfect for you," she said. "I can see how much you love each other. Are you okay with all this? Really okay? Sarah, I've spent the last few months thinking about your father and what he would have wanted for you. He would have wanted you to be happy, to be loved, to be yourself. Jessica clearly makes you happy, and she loves you. That's all that matters to me. I'm sorry I waited so long to tell you. I'm sorry Dad never got to meet her. Don't apologize for protecting yourself. You did what you needed to do to feel safe, but now you know you were always safe with us." On our last night, we stayed up late talking. Jessica fit seamlessly into our family conversations, sharing stories about her own childhood, her work, her dreams for the future. Jake talked about his job, Emma shared her plans to go back to school, and Mom told stories about Dad that made us all laugh. "He would have loved Jessica," Jake said. "He always said he could tell a lot about a person by how they treated kids, and Lily adores her. He would have loved how happy she makes Sarah," Emma added. "That's all he ever wanted for both of you." As we prepared to leave the next morning, I felt a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness that Dad wasn't there to say goodbye, gratitude that I'd finally found the courage to bring my 2 worlds together. "You'll come back for Christmas?" Mom asked as we hugged goodbye. "We'll be here," Jessica promised. "And maybe next time, you can come visit us in Seattle." "I'd like that," Mom said. "I'd like that very much." On the plane back to Seattle, I held Jessica's hand and thought about the weekend. It had been everything I'd hoped for and more. My family had welcomed Jessica with open arms, and I'd seen myself through their eyes, not as someone who'd been hiding a shameful secret, but as someone who'd been protecting something precious until she was ready to share it. "Thank you," I said to Jessica. "For what?" "For being patient with me, for waiting until I was ready, for being exactly who you are. Thank you for bringing me home." As the plane lifted off, I looked down at the city where I'd grown up, where my father was buried, where my family lived. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I belonged there completely. Not as a half version of myself, but as the whole person I'd always been. 2 years later, I stood in the same church where I'd grown up, wearing a white dress and holding a bouquet of white roses. But this time, I wasn't alone. Jessica stood beside me in a beautiful blue dress, and Father Williams was in front of us, preparing to officiate our wedding. The pews were filled with family and friends from both of our lives. Mom sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face, but smiling broadly. Jake and Emma were there with Lily, who was serving as our flower girl and took her job very seriously. Jessica's parents had flown in from California, and they'd hit it off immediately with my family. "Dearly beloved," Father Williams began, "we are gathered here today to celebrate the love between Sarah and Jessica, and to witness their commitment to each other before God and this community." I looked out at the congregation and saw faces I'd known my entire life. Mrs. Henderson, who taught me Sunday school; Mr. Rodriguez, who'd been Dad's golf partner; the Johnsons, who lived next door and had watched me grow up; people who'd known me as a child, who'd seen me struggle through adolescence, who'd watched me find my way to this moment. But the face I wished I could see wasn't there. Dad's absence was a physical ache in my chest, a reminder of the time we'd lost because of my fear. I'd spent many nights over the past 2 years wondering what he would have thought of this day, whether he would have walked me down the aisle, whether he would have danced with Jessica at the reception. As if reading my thoughts, Father Williams deviated from the traditional ceremony script. "Before we continue," he said, "I want to acknowledge someone who isn't with us today, but whose love is very much present." Robert Mitchell was a man who believed in the power of love to transform lives, to heal wounds, to bring people together. He raised his daughter to be a woman of integrity, compassion, and courage. While he cannot be here to witness this celebration, his legacy of love lives on in Sarah and in all of us who knew him. I felt Jessica squeeze my hand, and I saw Mom dab at her eyes with a tissue. The congregation was quiet, but I could feel the warmth of their support surrounding us. "Sarah," Father Williams continued, "your father would be proud to see you here today, living authentically and choosing love over fear. And Jessica, he would welcome you as the daughter he never had the chance to meet." The ceremony continued with readings from both scripture and poetry. Jake read from Corinthians about love being patient and kind. Emma read from Maya Angelou about the courage to be vulnerable. Jessica's sister read from Rumi about souls recognizing each other. When it came time for the vows, I looked into Jessica's eyes and spoke from my heart. "Jessica, 8 years ago, you saw me as I really was, even when I was hiding from myself. You loved me through my fear, my doubt, my long journey toward courage. You waited patiently while I learned to trust in the power of love, not just your love for me, but my family's love, God's love, and finally, my own love for myself." I paused, looking out at the congregation, at the faces of people who'd known me since childhood, and were now witnessing me become fully myself. I promised to continue growing in courage, to face our challenges together, to build a life that honors both where we came from and where we're going. I promise to love you with the same unconditional love my father taught me, the same accepting love my mother showed me, the same fierce love this community has given me. Jessica's vows were equally moving. "Sarah, you taught me that love isn't just about finding someone who accepts you as you are. It's about finding someone who inspires you to become who you're meant to be. You showed me that family isn't just about the people you're born to, but about the people who choose to love you unconditionally." She looked at Mom, then at Jake and Emma, then back at me. "I promise to honor your family as my own, to carry on your father's legacy of love and service, and to build a life together that would make him proud." When Father Williams pronounced us married, the church erupted in applause. As we kissed, I felt a sense of completeness I'd never experienced before. Not just because I was marrying the woman I loved, but because I was doing it surrounded by everyone who mattered to me, in the place that had shaped me, with the blessing of the community that had raised me. The reception was held in the church hall, the same space where I'd attended countless potluck dinners and youth group meetings. Mom had worked with the church ladies to transform it into something beautiful. white tablecloths, candles, and flowers from her garden. During the dinner, Jake stood to give a toast. Growing up, Sarah was always the one who thought too much about everything. She'd analyze every decision, worry about every possibility, plan for every contingency. But when it came to love, she just knew. She knew Jessica was the one, even if it took her a while to trust that knowledge. He raised his glass. Dad used to say that the best marriages are built on friendship, respect, and the willingness to grow together. Sarah and Jessica, you have all of that and more. Here's to a lifetime of love and laughter. As the evening progressed, I found myself thinking about how much had changed since that day I'd slipped the letter into Dad's pocket. The letter I'd never actually left there, but that had somehow accomplished its purpose anyway. It had forced me to confront my fear, to trust in love, to believe that the people who truly care about us want us to be happy more than they want us to be perfect. During the father-daughter dance, Jake stepped in to dance with me. I know Dad would have loved this, he said as we swayed to the music. He would have loved seeing you this happy. I miss him, I said. I wish he could have been here. He is here, Jake said. He's in Mom's smile, in the way this community rallied around you, in the love that made this whole thing possible. He's in the values he taught us and the example he set. Later, as the reception began to wind down, I found myself outside on the church steps with Mom and Jessica. The Portland evening was cool and clear, and I could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I have something for you, Mom said, pulling a small wrapped package from her purse. I was going to give it to you earlier, but I thought this might be a better moment. Inside was a leather-bound journal, worn and familiar. I recognized it immediately. It was Dad's journal, the one he'd written in every morning for as long as I could remember. I found this when I was going through his things, Mom said. I thought you should have it, but there's something specific I want you to see. She opened to a page dated just 2 months before Dad's diagnosis. In his familiar handwriting, I read, "Margaret and I had another conversation about Sarah today. We're both worried about her. She seems to be carrying some burden that she won't share with us. I wish I could tell her that there's nothing she could say that would make us love her less. I pray that someday she'll trust us enough to let us help her with whatever she's struggling with. All I want is for her to be happy and to know that she's loved exactly as she is." I looked up at Mom through tears. He wrote this? There are several entries like that. He knew you were struggling with something, and it broke his heart that you felt you couldn't come to him. Jessica read over my shoulder, and I felt her arm tighten around my waist. He would have been okay with us, she said softly. He would have loved you no matter what. I know that now, I said. I just wish I'd known it then. Maybe that's why this all happened the way it did, Mom said. Maybe you needed to find your own courage first, to be ready to accept his love instead of just hoping for it. As we prepared to leave for our honeymoon in Italy, I took one last look around the church hall, the same space where I'd attended countless Sunday dinners, where I'd been confirmed, where I'd questioned my faith and found it again. Now it was the place where I'd married the woman I loved, surrounded by the community that had shaped me. 6 months later, Jessica and I were back in Portland for Christmas, but this time we had news to share. We'd been approved for adoption, and we were expecting to bring home a baby girl in the spring. We want to name her Margaret, Jessica announced to the family gathered around Mom's Christmas tree. After her grandmother, Mom burst into tears. Are you sure? That's wonderful. But are you sure? We're sure, I said. She's going to grow up knowing she's part of a family that believes in love, acceptance, and the courage to be yourself. That's Dad's legacy, and now it's ours to pass on. That night, as we lay in my childhood bedroom, Jessica and I talked about the future, about raising our daughter in a world that was slowly becoming more accepting, about the stories we'd tell her about her grandfather, about the importance of being true to yourself, about the power of love to overcome fear. Do you think she'll struggle with the same things you did? Jessica asked. Maybe, but she'll also know from the beginning that she's loved unconditionally. She'll grow up seeing that families come in all shapes and sizes, that love is what matters most. And if she's gay, then she'll know she can bring her girlfriend home for Christmas without hiding who she is for 15 years. Jessica laughed. And if she's straight, then she'll know that being different is okay, that acceptance is a gift we give to each other, that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting with love despite the fear. A year later, we brought baby Margaret home. She was 6 months old, with dark hair and bright eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Mom held her for the first time in the same living room where I'd grown up, and I saw something in her face that I'd never seen before. Pure joy mixed with a kind of healing. "She looks like you did as a baby," Mom said, gently rocking little Margaret. Same serious expression, same curiosity about the world. "I hope she gets Jessica's patience," I said. "And your strength, and her grandfather's kindness," Jessica added. As I watched my mother hold my daughter, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment, the fear that had kept me hidden for so long, the courage that had finally set me free, the love that had sustained us through everything. The letter I'd written to Dad had never been found by anyone but Father Williams, but in a way, it had accomplished exactly what I'd hoped. It had opened a door that had been closed for too long, had started a conversation that was years overdue, had allowed love to bridge the gap between who I was and who I'd been afraid to be. Now, as I held my daughter and looked around at my family, Mom, Jake, Emma, Lily, and Jessica, I realized that Dad's legacy wasn't just in the memories we shared of him. It was in the love we'd chosen to embrace, the acceptance we'd learned to offer each other, and the courage we'd found to be authentic. Little Margaret would grow up knowing she was part of a family that had learned to love without conditions, to accept without judgment, to support each other through every challenge. She'd know that love comes in many forms, that families are built on more than biology, that the courage to be yourself is the greatest gift you can give to the people who care about you. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat in the nursery we'd prepared for Margaret. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and there were pictures of the family she was joining. Mom and Dad on their wedding day, Jake and Emma with Lily, Jessica and me at our wedding, even a photo of the house where I'd grown up. On the bookshelf, I'd placed Dad's journal, the one Mom had given me on my wedding day. Someday, when Margaret was old enough to understand, I'd share with her the entries where her grandfather had written about love, about acceptance, about the importance of being true to yourself. But for now, I just held her close and whispered the same words I'd heard throughout my childhood. "You are loved exactly as you are. You are perfect, and you are enough, and you are home." Outside, the Portland rain was falling softly, the same rain that had been falling the day I'd stood in the funeral home and made the decision to write that letter. The rain that had witnessed my fear, my courage, my journey toward truth. The rain that was now blessing a new generation, a new beginning, a new chapter in the story of love that Dad had started, and we were committed to continuing. As I rocked my daughter to sleep, I thought about the letter one more time. Not the one I'd written to Dad, but the one I imagined he might have written to me if he'd had the chance. It would have been simple, like everything about him. It would have said that love is stronger than fear, that family is about acceptance, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act with love despite it. And it would have ended the way all his conversations with me had ended, with the words that had shaped my understanding of what it means to be loved. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. No matter what, I'm proud of you." In the quiet of the nursery, with my daughter sleeping peacefully in my arms, I finally understood that those words had been true all along. They had been true when I was hiding, true when I was afraid, true when I was learning to be brave. They were true now, and they would be true for Margaret as she grew up in a world where love, in all its forms, was celebrated and protected. The letter I'd hidden in Dad's pocket had been found after all, not by the priest who'd officiated his funeral, but by the family who'd learned to love without limits, by the community that had chosen acceptance over judgment, by the daughter who'd finally found the courage to live authentically. And in the end, that was the greatest gift Dad could have given me. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of love strong enough to overcome it. A love that would continue to grow and spread from generation to generation, carried forward by the family we'd chosen to become and the values we'd committed to live by. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the world clean, preparing it for new growth, new beginnings, new stories of love waiting to be written. And in that peaceful nursery, surrounded by the evidence of a life lived authentically, I finally understood that some letters don't need to be written to be received. Some messages are communicated through the simple act of choosing love over fear, acceptance over judgment, courage over safety. Dad had received my letter after all, not through words on paper, but through the life I'd chosen to live, the love I'd chosen to embrace, and the family I'd chosen to build. And his response had been written in the legacy he'd left behind, a legacy of unconditional love that would continue to guide us, protect us, and inspire us for generations to come. Epilogue, full circle. 5 years had passed since that rain-soaked day when I'd stood in the funeral home, clutching a letter I'd never had the courage to give my father while he was alive. Now, as I sat in the same church where I'd grown up, where I'd gotten married, where Dad had served as a deacon for so many years, I was preparing to share my story with a much larger audience. The local newspaper had asked me to speak at a community forum about LGBTQ+ acceptance in faith communities. It was part of a series they were running about how traditional institutions were evolving to become more inclusive. When they'd first approached me, I'd hesitated. Public speaking had never been my strength, and talking about such personal experiences felt overwhelming. But Jessica had encouraged me. Think about all the people who might be sitting in those pews, hiding the same secret you carried for 15 years, she'd said. Think about the parents who might be struggling to understand their children. Your story could help them. Margaret, now 6 years old, sat in the front row with Jessica and Mom. She was old enough to understand that Mommy Sarah was giving a speech about love and families, though she didn't yet grasp the full complexity of what we'd been through. She swung her legs from the pew, occasionally whispering to her grandmother, completely comfortable in this sacred space that had witnessed so much of our family's journey. "Good evening," I began, my voice slightly shaky as I looked out at the crowd of about 200 people. "My name is Sarah Mitchell Chen, and I want to tell you about a letter I almost left in my father's casket 5 years ago." The audience was diverse: young families, elderly couples, teenagers who looked uncomfortable being there, parents who seemed both hopeful and worried. I recognized some faces from my childhood, people who'd watched me grow up in this very church. I was 37 years old when my father died, and I had been keeping a secret from my family for 15 years. I was gay, in a committed relationship, and absolutely terrified that the people I loved most in the world would reject me if they knew the truth. I paused, taking a breath, remembering Jessica's advice to speak slowly and from the heart. The letter I wrote contained everything I'd never been able to say out loud. My fear, my love for my partner Jessica, my desperate hope that somehow, even in death, my father might be able to forgive me for not trusting him with the truth while he was alive. As I continued telling the story, I watched faces in the audience change. Some people leaned forward, clearly relating to the struggle I was describing. Others looked thoughtful, perhaps considering their own family relationships in a new light. A few seemed uncomfortable, but they stayed and listened. "I want to be clear about something," I said, addressing what I knew some people might be thinking. "This isn't a story about choosing between faith and sexuality. This is a story about fear versus love, about the courage it takes to trust the people who care about us, and about discovering that love, real, unconditional love, is stronger than any fear we can imagine." I told them about Father Williams finding the letter, about his compassion and wisdom. I described the conversation with my mother that changed everything, about bringing Jessica home to meet my family, about our wedding in this very church. "My daughter Margaret will never know what it feels like to hide who she is from the people who love her," I continued, glancing down at my little girl, who was now drawing in a coloring book. "Not because she won't face challenges, she will, but because she's growing up knowing that love comes in many forms, that families are built on acceptance and understanding, and that the most important thing we can do for each other is create safe spaces for honesty." During the question and answer session that followed, a young man in his early 20s raised his hand. His voice was barely above a whisper when he spoke. "I'm 19, and I've been struggling with telling my parents about my boyfriend. They're good people, but they're very traditional. How did you know it was the right time?" I looked at him, seeing myself at his age, and felt my heart break a little. "I don't think there's ever a perfect time," I said gently. "But I can tell you that the time I wasted being afraid was time I could have spent being loved and supported. If your parents are good people, trust in their goodness. And remember, their initial reaction might not be their final reaction. People need time to grow and understand." An older woman stood up next. "I'm a mother, and my son came out to me last year. I love him, but I'll be honest, I've struggled with it. What would you say to parents like me?" I appreciated her honesty. I'd say that your love for your son is already the most important thing. Everything else can be worked through. Talk to him, ask questions, meet the people who are important to him. Remember that he's still the same person he's always been. You just know him more completely now. A middle-aged man raised his hand. I'm curious about the role of the church in your story. How do you reconcile your faith with your lifestyle? I'd expected this question, and I'd thought carefully about how to answer it. I don't see anything to reconcile, I said. My faith teaches me that love is the greatest commandment. My relationship with Jessica is built on love, commitment, faithfulness, and mutual support, all values that my faith celebrates. The God I worship is a God of love, not a God who would condemn people for loving each other. Father Williams, who was sitting in the third row, nodded encouragingly. After my talk, he would speak about the church's evolving understanding of inclusion and acceptance. As the evening continued, more people shared their stories. A grandmother talked about learning to accept her transgender granddaughter. A young woman described bringing her girlfriend to her conservative family's Thanksgiving dinner. A father shared his journey from rejection to acceptance when his son came out. Each story reminded me of something I'd learned over the past 5 years, that courage is contagious. When one person chooses to live authentically, it gives others permission to do the same. When families choose love over fear, it creates ripples that extend far beyond their own relationships. After the formal program ended, I was approached by several people who wanted to continue the conversation. A teenage girl slipped me a note that simply said, "Thank you for giving me hope." A mother asked for advice about supporting her daughter, who was questioning her identity. A man in his 50s shared that he'd been in the closet for decades and was finally considering coming out to his elderly parents. As we drove home that night, Margaret asleep in her car seat, Jessica reached over and took my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. "That was brave." "I kept thinking about Dad," I admitted, about how he would have felt seeing all those people, hearing all those stories. I think he would have been proud too. I know he would have been. When we got home, I tucked Margaret into bed and read her a story about a family of penguins. She was at an age where she asked endless questions about everything, and lately she'd been curious about families. "Mommy's Sarah," she said, as I was turning off her light. "Why do some kids have a mommy and daddy, and I have 2 mommies?" "Because families come in all different shapes," I said, sitting back down on her bed. "Some kids have a mommy and daddy. Some have 2 mommies or 2 daddies. Some live with their grandparents. Some have step-parents. What makes a family isn't who's in it. It's how much they love each other. Like how much you and Mommy Jessica love me." "Exactly like that. And Grandma Margaret loves me too. She absolutely does. And your Grandpa Robert would have loved you so much if he were still here." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about Grandpa Robert." I settled in for one of our regular conversations about the grandfather she'd never met, but who was very much a part of her story. "Grandpa Robert was the kindest man I ever knew," I began. "He taught me that the most important thing in life is to love people for who they are, not who you think they should be. He would have loved you so much, little one. He would have read you stories and taken you to the park and spoiled you rotten. Would he have loved Mommy Jessica too? He would have loved her because she makes me happy and because she loves you. That's the kind of man he was." After Margaret fell asleep, I found myself in the kitchen with Jessica, sharing a cup of tea and processing the events of the evening. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" I asked, "sharing our story so publicly?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, exposing ourselves, talking about personal things in front of strangers. Sometimes I worry about Margaret growing up with everyone knowing our business." Jessica considered this. "I think Margaret is going to grow up proud of her family's story. She's going to know that her parents had the courage to live authentically and to help other people do the same. That's not a burden. That's a gift." "I hope you're right. Remember what you said tonight about courage being contagious? I saw it happening in that room. People were inspired by your story to think differently about their own situations. That's powerful." 6 months later, I received an email that would stay with me forever. It was from the young man who'd asked about telling his parents about his boyfriend. "Dear Sarah," it read, "I wanted you to know that I took your advice. I told my parents about Michael last month. It wasn't easy, and there were some tears, but they want to meet him. We're having dinner next week. Thank you for showing me that love is stronger than fear. Your story gave me the courage to trust in my family's love." Reading that email, I thought about the ripple effects of choosing courage over fear. That young man would now bring his boyfriend home for holidays. His parents would learn to love someone new. His story might inspire other families to choose acceptance. The circle of love would continue to grow. A year later, Jessica and I received another call from the adoption agency. They had a little boy, 18 months old, who needed a family. His name was David, and he'd been in foster care since he was a baby. "Are you ready to expand our family again?" Jessica asked after we'd gotten all the details. I looked around our house, the photos covering the refrigerator, Margaret's artwork hanging on the walls, the sound of her laughter coming from the backyard where she was playing with the neighbor's dog. "I think we have a lot of love to share," I said. David joined our family that fall, a quiet, serious little boy with dark eyes and a cautious smile. Margaret immediately appointed herself his big sister and protector, showing him around the house and teaching him the names of all her stuffed animals. Mom was in heaven with 2 grandchildren to spoil. She'd moved to Seattle the year before, saying she wanted to be closer to us and didn't want to miss any more of her grandchildren's lives. She'd found a small apartment near us and had quickly become an indispensable part of our daily routine. "Robert would have loved this chaos," she said one Sunday afternoon, as we watched Margaret try to teach David how to color inside the lines. "He always said the house was too quiet after you kids moved out." "Do you think he knows?" I asked. "About all of this?" "I think love like his doesn't just disappear," Mom said. "I think it continues, gets passed down, grows bigger with each generation." That evening, after the kids were in bed, I found myself looking through Dad's journal again. There was one entry I'd never shared with anyone, written just a week before his diagnosis. It said, "I've been thinking about legacy lately. What do we leave behind when we're gone? I hope my children remember that I loved them unconditionally. I hope they know they can tell me anything. I hope they understand that love, real love, isn't about agreement or approval. It's about acceptance, support, and the commitment to stand by the people you care about no matter what. If I've taught them that, then I've done my job as a father." Reading those words, I realized that Dad had left me the letter I'd been looking for all along. Not hidden in a pocket or tucked away in a book, but written in the values he'd instilled in me, the love he'd modeled, and the courage he'd given me to trust in the power of acceptance. As I closed the journal and prepared for bed, I thought about the letter I might write to my own children someday. It would tell them about their grandfather, about the courage it takes to live authentically, about the importance of creating families built on love rather than expectation. But mostly, it would tell them what Dad's life had taught me, that love isn't conditional, courage isn't the absence of fear, and the most important thing we can do for each other is create space for honesty, acceptance, and the beautiful complexity of being human. Outside, the Seattle rain was falling gently, and I could hear the sound of Jessica reading to David in his room, her voice soft and patient as she helped him settle into sleep. Margaret was already dreaming, probably about the new playground we'd promised to visit tomorrow. This was the life Dad had wanted for me, filled with love, laughter, and the freedom to be exactly who I was meant to be. And in living it fully, authentically, and courageously, I was finally able to give him the letter he'd been waiting for all along. Not written in words, but lived in the daily choice to love without limits, accept without conditions, and trust in the transformative power of being truly known. The circle was complete, but the story continued. With every choice to live authentically, every family who chose love over fear, every person who found the courage to share their truth, Dad's legacy grew stronger. And in that growing legacy of love, I finally understood that some letters don't need to be hidden away. They need to be lived, shared, and passed on to the next generation, who will carry them forward into an even more loving world.